will discuss an important issue that comes under local bodies. Now, it is mainly the issue that happened at Nagaland. Now, before we move on to the issue as such, we will first of all look into certain constitutional provisions. We will begin with Article 371A. Now, what is this Article 371A? It provides special provision to the state of Nagaland. And when was it inserted? It was inserted as a part of the agreement that finally saw Nagaland becoming the 16th state of India in 1963. Now, we are concerned about the first clause of Article 371A, which states that no act of the Parliament in respect of the religious or the social practices of the Nagas or the customary law and procedure, administration of the civil as well as criminal justice relating to the customary law, and ownership and the transfer of the land and its resources shall apply to the state of Nagaland unless the state legislature decides it through a resolution. So, this is the provision or the special provision that was being given to the state of Nagaland. Now, along with Article 371A, we need to consider another article, that is Article 243T. Now, this article was being inserted as a part of the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, which saw the insertion of Part 9A into the Constitution, which mentions about the urban local bodies. Now, as per this amendment, we have the Article 243T, which states that not less than 1/3 of the total number of the seats to be filled by the direct election in every municipality shall be reserved for women. So, that means that from now or from this amendment, what was inferred is that there was a mandatory 33% reservation for women in municipalities. Now, we will come into the issue as such. Now, when you analyze the state of Nagaland, it is mainly a tribal society, that is, it has many tribal groups, and it is mainly said to be male dominated. Now, the problem is that as per Article 243T, what was included? That is a mandatory inclusion or the reservation of 33% for the women. Now, there was acceptance or there was resistance in accepting this particular reservation. So, after the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act came in 1992, the Nagaland state passed this Municipal and Town Council Act in 2001, and that did not include this particular mandatory reservation for women, that is 33% reservation in this particular act. Now, so the urban local body polls or the election that happened in 2004 did not have this particular provision, that is for the reservation of the women. But in 2005, with the interference of the High Court, the Municipal Act was amended and this mandatory provision of 33% reservation was being included in this particular act. But what happened is that 2004 the first election happened, that is first urban or civic polls happened, and the tenure of a particular urban local body is for 5 years, and the next election had to happen in 2009, but it did not happen because of the opposition from the tribal bodies who did not support this 33% reservation for women. So this issue was being taken up to the High Court and by the women's organization, and a single bench of the Guwahati High Court had ruled that or directed the government to conduct the elections with this mandatory reservation of 33%. But what happened is that the state government went for an appeal to the division bench, which set aside the order that was given up by the single bench. So the single bench ordered for conducting the elections as per with the inclusion of the reservation provision, but that was set aside by the division bench, and at the same time along with the order of the division bench, the resolution or the government passed a resolution that said that the reservation was not applicable to the state under Article 371A. So in 2016, the Apex Court or the Supreme Court had interfered and ordered the government to conduct the election with this mandatory 33% reservation, and the government enacted the Nagaland Municipal, that is a third amendment bill in 2016. So what happened is that with this particular act, the government decided to conduct the civic polls on Feb 1st of 2017. But the problem is that there were numerous violence by the tribal groups and law and order situations arise. So what happened is that election happened in certain areas and it did not happen in other areas. So what happened is that totally the elections were being cancelled. So if a question is as to what exactly is the issue happening in Nagaland in regard to the urban local bodies, it's basically the conflict that is happening between the custom as well as the constitutional rights. Okay. Now, as to the question whether the state has been affected by the not conducting of the fresh elections, yes, it has suffered. Now, how? The first thing is that this has deprived the state of various developmental funds which the local bodies are entitled for. They are not doing the mandatory provisions, or they are not following the mandatory provisions which include the 33% reservation for women as well as conduct of the elections to the local bodies every 5 years. So, these are not being followed, and that has deprived the state of various developmental funds. So, that is affecting the state. And second thing is that if you compare the states, this Nagaland with the other states which have actively supported the women in the political process, you can say that those states have fared well when you compare it with respect to the social indicators, with respect to the delivery of the services, with respect to the governance as a whole. So, you can say that the state has suffered because it has been deprived of the developmental funds, and also the governance is also being affected. So, to the question as to why exactly there is a resistance by the tribal bodies to this 33% reservation is that, as I have already mentioned, Naga tribal groups are mainly patriarchal in nature. So, they view this particular 33% reservation for women section as going against their customary practices. So, that is the first thing. Second thing is in regard to the ownership of the land as well as resources. Now, mainly, or as per the customary practices, the ownership of the land as well as resources mainly lies with the men. So, the real fear is that once the political empowerment of the women happens, that can eventually lead to the men getting or losing the control over the land as well as resources, how it is being controlled as well as shared. So, that is another fear. And then also, there is also potential fear of the disruption of the status quo. Now, I have already mentioned that the Article 243T comes under the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act that mainly deals with the urban local bodies. Now, along with the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, there was also 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act which mainly dealt with the Panchayati Raj institutions. Now, it also contained this 33% reservation for women, but the problem is that Nagaland was among the other states that were being exempted from this particular provision. So, there is a fear that once the mandatory reservation is given to the women in the urban local bodies, that can also lead to the demand from the village section on the 33% reservation for the women. So, that is why they fear the potential fear of the disruption of the status quo that is existing in the village, where they are being exempted from this 33% reservation. Now, another reason that is cited for the resistance by the tribal groups is that it has been widely seen as an effort that is infringing on the state's autonomy. So, these are the main things that come under as to why there is a resistance by the tribal groups against the implementation of the 33% mandatory reservation for women in the urban local bodies. Now, looking into the status of women or the women representation, you can say that Nagaland society firmly believes that women must be respected and their security should not be compromised at any cost. So, but the problem is that we can never equate the security with that of the equality. Now, when you look into the increasing role of women that is happening in this Nagaland state, you can see that informally they are involved in every sphere. With respect to the academics, the women's section is excelling, and they are also becoming good entrepreneurs, and the women's section are also being widely playing an important role with respect to the peace among the militant groups in the state of Nagaland. But when you analyze the recently released Gender Statistic Report of 2016, even though it cites certain positive features like that of the women or the female literacy rate, which has increased from about 61.5% in 2001 to around 76.1% in 2011, that is about 14.6% increase over the 10 years. It also cites that when it comes to the participation of the women in the decision making or the participation of women in the formal institutions, it is very, very less. And that is not a good thing for the state as such. Now, it has also been cited that the tribal bodies are also citing that the village development boards, that is, these are mainly the smaller institutions that look into the implementation of various economic projects. Now, it has also provided for 25% reservation for women, but this particular reservation is lying on the paper, it has not been properly implemented. So that is with respect to the village development boards, which has in itself a 25% reservation for women. And also when it comes to the women representatives in the legislative assembly itself, since 1960s there has only been one representative or women representative from as a member of legislative assembly. So this is what you see when you analyze the status of women in this particular state of Nagaland. Now when you look into various other problems, first thing is in regard to the state government failure. Now the state governments over the years have always tend to maintain the status quo and not conduct the civic polls with the 33% reservation for women. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that when the present state government had declared that the election would happen on the Feb 1st of 2017, it should have anticipated the kind of violence or the law and order issues that would surface on the election date. So that was not properly being anticipated, and that has resulted in the election getting cancelled. So that's the first thing. Another problematic area is in regard to the misuse of the special status that has been granted to the state of Nagaland. Now most of the tribal bodies, that is including the Naga Hoho, which is spearheading the protest against the reservation, they emerged after 1980s, and they are not the traditional Naga institutions. Now the traditional Naga institutions are that were being recognized by the British as well as the Indian government are the village parliaments, and they are mainly considered to be the custodians of the customary laws as well as practices of the Naga society. So these are the various problematic areas that also need to be considered. That is the state government's failure in bringing about this particular reservation, and second thing, there has been a misuse that is happening to the special status that has been granted. Now what are the various developments that has happened to the state in regard to this particular issue is that, first thing, I have already mentioned that the part 9, which is dealing with the Panchayati Raj, exempts the Nagaland from the 33% reservation for women, and the state government has been requesting, or it has requested to the central government to exempt Nagaland from the provisions of the part 9A. That is with respect to the mandatory provision, that is 33% reservation for women. And also recently a Nagaland cabinet committee was being formed to review this particular municipal act of 2002. So these are the main developments. Now looking into the way forward, the suggestions that can be said is that when you consider this issue in Nagaland, you can say that it's an unfair practice and it is having various consequences, because one thing, it can have an influence on the other states. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that the not proper implementation of the various mandatory provisions is only affecting the state itself, because I've already mentioned it is not getting the developmental funds, its governance is getting affected. So in this case, what is exactly the conflict? It's between the equality as well as custom, and equality has to given prime importance because it is only for the benefit of the state of Nagaland itself. Now when you see about the various issues like the triple talaq, where the judiciary has taken up its decision, such changes have to come in, but it should not be imposed on the Naga society. Instead, there is a need for an agreement that is based on the consensus without compromising equality. So for that, we need to bring in together the government, the tribal society, the women's section, the civil society. Everybody need to be brought in on board, and a decision has to be taken. Along with these, you can also cite the suggestion of the need to have an attitudinal change in the Naga society itself. Because when you analyze the vote share that has been received by the women candidate in different elections, it has been very, very less. So if such an attitudinal change is not being brought about, then the women candidate won't be encouraged to stand for elections. So that is another thing that has to be taken care of. So these are the main issues in regard to the Naga issue.